Hey, Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Mem, not Mem, Nun. Nun Dalid. Nun Dalid. Daf Nun Dalid and Bab Mציעא, as we learn from Achenu based on Sunnah Tzar Shifya. Now we're down to the words Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the beginning of a line, a little bit past the halfway part on the daf, a little bit below that. The beginning of the line is Amar Rabbi Yochanan. It's a few lines above Tosas Divrei Maskil Olav. Now this we've been talking about when you add on the 25%, or let's call it chomesh. It's 20% of the full amount, of the outer amount, the brutto amount after you paid it, or is of the original amount 20%. See, it's called chomesh, it's 20%, but really in our language, the way we talk, we say you're really adding on 25%. Because if you started with 20 and you pay 25, you're adding on 25%, a quarter more. So we call it a fifth, but it's really 25%. Now, so the question was, is that ma'akiv? If I'm Poda Meiser Sheni in Tel Aviv and I bring the money to Yerushalayim, and if it's my own, if it's my property, my produce, I have to add on a fifth. Okay, let's say I didn't add on a fifth. They didn't add on the chomesh. Can I still eat it? I'm over a lot for eating or not. So we said, no, you're not. We said the general opinion is that you're not over. The question is, one says you shouldn't eat it because we're afraid you won't add on the fifth later on. In other words, it's not mockery. It's not, if you're opposed for money, you're not over if you eat it at that point, even if you didn't add on the chomesh, but you still have to add on the chomesh. So one says, Rabbi Yeshua said you shouldn't eat it because we're afraid you won't add on the chomesh. We're afraid you'll be negligent and you won't add it on. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan, I'll come out of a hegdish. Let's say hegdish, you're makdish something, and then you're quoted from hegdish, you give money or something else in place of it. Shechilul, there, it works, even if you didn't add on the 25%, the chomesh yet. Why? Because the treasurers of hegdish, they will demand the money from you. See, when it's meiser sheni, it's your own produce. You might just redeem it for money. You're supposed to add on more money and take your shleim, but it's a personal thing. You're not involved with the gizbarm of the hegdish. Nobody's demanding it from you. There's no government authority or the Gizbar of Hegdish who are demanding it. But if it's Hegdish, they'll demand it from you. And therefore, even if you didn't add on the chomesh, it's still mechulal. It's still mechulal. It's considered, in other words, what does mechulal? You're exchanging it. It's a transfer. You're changing the kedusha from something in the base mikdash to something else. And then the thing that you take out of the base mikdash is no longer Hegdish, even though you didn't add on the 25% yet. Why? Because the Gizbarim will demand that they'll find you in the marketplace and they'll take it. Even if they can't come into your house, they will find you and they'll demand it from you. This is more of hegdish lo pligi. So we learn if you paid the karen by hegdish and you didn't add on the 20 for the chomesh. Rabbi Lezer Omer Chilul. Rabbi Lezer says it is redeemed. The chomam lochil. So you see the machlokas even by hegdish. Amar Rebbe, and Rebbe says near and divrei Rabbi Lezer hegdish. I agree with hegdish. And I agree with the Chacham when it comes. I agree with Rabbi Lezer when it comes to hegdish. Rabbi Lezer who says that it is considered redeemed, and I agree with the Chachamim that would be like Rabbi Shua when it comes to Meiser. Now that it's considered redeemed, that it's not considered redeemed. Why? Presumably because again you're worried about Pshia. You're worried about that he may not add on the 25%. Not that they're really over and above if you didn't pay the chomesh yet and you ate the produce in Tel Aviv. But you're worried about Pshia. So Rabbi says, I agree with Rabbi Lezer by hegdish that it's considered redeemed even though you didn't add on the chomesh yet. But that you shouldn't. That the midrash in there and Rabbi Lezer by hegdish. Since I agree with Rabbi Lezer hegdish, machal the polygraph with meiser. Mashma he disagrees even with meiser. Midikam in there and Chacham by meiser. Since he says I agree with the Chacham when it comes to meiser, machal the inu pligafi with hegdish. So what do you see? There's a machlokas by hegdish too. By hegdish too, whether you can whether it's considered redeemed even if you didn't pay the chomesh. On Shabbos, if you had to be posted something from hegdish because you needed to eat it, let's say you gave an animal, let's say had a mum, and you were posted that, and you needed it, or whatever it was, you needed the item that you were makdish, you needed on Shabbos. Shechilo charav for two reasons. Number one, that it's considered redeemed even though you didn't pay the extra chomesh yet. And I think it's wrong. Number one, because the Shabbos should be a day of delight. You should have good stuff. So maybe you need something that you gave to the base midrash. You need it for your Shabbos table. Another reason is because when it comes to hegdish, they will demand it from you. So the idea here is that it seems that by Hegdish, that it's by Hegdish and by Meiser, it's really considered redeemed, even if you didn't add on the Chomesh. The reason Rabbi Yeshua said that you shouldn't eat it because you're worried that maybe you won't add on the 25%. But when it comes to Hegdish on Shabbos, you're not worried about that because the Gizbarim will demand it for you, and also it'll enhance your Shabbos if you need to redeem something. Yeah. There's no real time limit, but they'll demand it from you. There's no time limit. You're supposed to do it right away, but if you didn't do it, there's no time limit.
You always have to add Chomesh?
Yes. If you, we're going to talk about that in detail today. If you gave it was the first thing you gave for Hegdish and you redeemed it, you have to add on 25%. What about if after you added on 20, let's say you redeemed it for some other item, right? And then you redeem that item. Do you have to also 25%? That's going to be a discussion we're going to have later on. Okay. Now, Amar Chama. We said Hegdish ain't a mischal ala karka. Here's the question: when you redeem Hegdish, you can't do it for property. You can't give a nadlan, real estate, for Hegdish. It's got to be like money. You got to give money, something which is hand to hand that you can give over. What about the extra 25%? What about the Chomesh? Can that be karka or not? Karka. That's one question when it comes to Hegdish. Truma, where we said if you ate truma by mistake and you have to add on, if you're a zor and you ate truma by mistake, you have to add on 25%. The Chomesh, what about that? Truma ain't a mishlomas el marachulin. When you have to make up the truma, you ate truma by mistake, you have to give other produce in its place. You can't give money or clothes or something. You got to give payros, you got to have produce. Okay. Drachman of Vanasan like Kohen Esa Kodesh. So you got to give something of our royal Kodesh. When you give that, when you replace the truma that you ate with other produce, that stuff becomes truma. Has the kedusha of truma. It's got to be something that could be kodesh like produce. Chumashima. What about the extra chumash you had? Can you pay the extra chumash not from produce? That's the question. Another question. Meiser. All these cases you add on the chumash, whether it's hegdish, whether it's truma, whether it's meiser. Meiser that you had a meiser and mischal asum. The meiser shein that you redeem for, we said he has to be on money. Remember coins with tzar takesef. You can't do it on a simon, on a blank, right, on a piece of metal. You have to form it. Tzartak also means you have to tie it up, but it also means tzarta like a tzura. The rabbis called anything that has a coin. What about the chomesh? What about that? Does that also have to be on a coin? Chomesh mashis chal asiman. These questions were raised, and the question is Skalko Milsa Matal Kamir Rava. The question eventually reached Rava's desk. Amar Lahu, he said, Amar Pasuk says, Alav, L'Rabos Chomsho Kamoso. It says he said Yosef Chamishiso or Chamishisav, different psukim as we'll see. Alav, on it, it's got to be like it, just like it has to be, as we said, when it comes to karka, when it comes to hegdish, it cannot be karka. When it comes to truma, it has to be produce. When it has to be meiser, it has to be a coin. It's got to be just like the extra chomesh has to be like the principle itself. Ravina. We saw in a brayso also. A gun of truma. Let's say you're a ganef. Remember, a ganef, a burglar pays kefil when he's caught with Adam, right? Let's say he stole truma from a kohen. He didn't need it. Misham tashlim, he pays kefil. Demei truma. The value of truma. What do you mean? If he didn't need it, he returns the item itself, right? If they caught him red-handed, he's got the kefil. If he didn't need it, so he returns the truma itself and double its value. Now, double its value means to make truma because truma is sold at a lower price than regular produce because it's limited. Only a kohen can eat it, and only when it's tahor and when he's tahor, etc. So it has a lower street value. So he pays that lower street value. In other words, he returns the truma plus he has to double it because that's the punishment for burglary, and he doubles it at the rate of truma. Let's say if he ate it. The Ganim ate it. So what does he do now? He's still got to pay kefil, but it's not here to return. Misham Shnei Kradim, the Chomesh, because since he ate Truma B'Shoga, he didn't know it was Truma, let's say. If he ate it on purpose, to Chayiv Misa. But let's say he ate it, he stole it, he didn't know it was Truma, and he ate it. So now he has to add on the Chomesh, the 25%. So Karen B'Chomesh Minachulin. Here he says B'Ferish. The Karen and the Chomesh also has to be from produce not from some other item. It can't be cash or clothing or kalim, whatever. You see from over here that chomsho kamoso, that the chomesh has to be like it itself. So here's at least the proof, like that for truma. It doesn't prove it for meiser and for hegdish, but the idea is that they're all the same. Amarava, gabi gezel. Now there's another place where you add on a chomesh, where you stole something, remember, or you misappropriated it, and then you denied it. You swore falsely, and then you admitted it later on. Remember? So that's asham zeos. You have to bring a korban asham for swearing falsely, and then you admit it, and you have to pay it back, and you have to add on chomesh. In all these cases, as we saw yesterday, we paskin that the chomesh is milabar. It's after you paid the full amount, the amount that you added on, that was 20% of the total. And when I say 25%, I keep saying 25% of the original amount. So in the case where it was $20, you add on not $4, which is 20% of 20. All right, it's not 20, but you add on $5. So it's 25. So it's you're adding on really 25% of the original amount, which is 1/5 or 20% of the total. Okay, so by Gesel, you have that same thing when you admitted it. Now there, the pasuk says, listen, look at the words carefully. Amarava, Gabi Gesel, it says b'chamishi sov, and it's fifths with an s at the end, plural. It doesn't say chamishi so or chamishis or chamishis a fifth. It says b'chamishi sov, it's plural. B'chamishi sov Yosef alav. That's what it says. Gesel utnan nason sekaren. Let's say. So what does that mean? How do you have more than 1/5? You have a fifth, right? You pay adding on a fifth. Okay, it's 25%, we said, of the original amount. How do you have more than that? The answer is you pay the Gesel bet, right? And you were chayiv to pay 25%. Let's say you stole $20, same example, right? You're supposed to give back 25, right? You denied it, you have to pay 25. Now, okay, you owe 25. You paid the 20 and you denied the 5. You said the 5 I already paid you. I paid you 25, you only paid 20. Now he's swearing falsely on the 5th. So and then he admits it all. Then he has to pay a 5th of that. You understand? He has to pay a 5th of the 5. The extra 5 is pay a 5th of that. That's the plural. He swore on the 5th that he said I paid it. On that 5. I raise the most of chomesh, and this can keep on going on. Then he'll pay the 5th. He'll pay the 5th of the 5. Right? Add that on. It's a 5th of the total that comes out, right? So it's not exactly right. It's 20. It's an extra whatever it is, 1.5, I guess, 1.5. So you pay, and then he's chayiv on, and then he pays that, and then he denies the extra 5th on that. He says, I paid that already too. And he swore falsely. Actually, he's smart. I can't pachas m'shava pruta until the Karen is less than a shava pruta. In other words, that he swears on the amount that he's swearing on, that extra 5th is less than a shava pruta. Then they're not chayiv. So the point is, you're chayiv meant you can be chayiv multiple 5ths. Let's call it multiple 5ths. Rashi says, "Achi smara karen chomesh u mechuyev par v'chozer v'kofro kari karen." Right? Achi kfir shvuasa, but unless he swears until he swears for less than a shava pruta, he's not chayiv, because there you're not chayiv. That less than shava pruta has no meaning. But otherwise, you could be chayiv if the amount was a substantial amount of money. It was that $10,000, whatever. The 5th, it keeps on going on. You could be chayiv many 5ths over here for swearing falsely each time. That's what it says by Gesel, because it says chamishi sov. Gabi trumiksiv, it says ish kiyochel kodesh b'shgoga v'yosaf chamishi so alav. Now here it says v'yosaf, right? It says v'yosaf. In the first pasuk, it says Yosef alav. Here it says v'yosaf, a vav, extra vav there. So we're going to darshan that. By truma, if you ate truma by mistake, this is when you didn't go, burgle from somebody. You simply ate truma by mistake. You're a czar, and you're chayiv to pay the amount and replace it with produce, and you have to add on. If it says v'yosaf chamisha sola, utanana ochel truma b'shogeg b'shogeg b'shalom keren b'chomish. Echad ochel, whether you ate, whether you ate, drank, or you use it to anoint your body, because the Rashi brings down the psukim. Drinking is like eating, because it says it's a dachalta lefnei Hashem Elokecha degancha v'ti roshcha. So even though it says you're talking about wine, it says v'achalta. So drinking is like eating, And soch, if you use it to anoint your body, it says vatavo kamayim bekirbo chashem and batzmosav is compared to to drinking water. So that's fine. But if you destroy it, then you're not. You're only chayiv if you used it to help your body. You pay a fifth, as Pasuk says. You have to pay a fifth. It says this kodesh is referring to truma, and you add on a fifth. You also add on a fifth to a fifth, meaning just like we saw by Gezel, you add on the fifth can add on. How does the fifth add on? If the fifth that you added on the produce, remember, if you ate it by mistake, you have to make it up with other produce, and that becomes truma. Now, if you ate that fifth by mistake, same thing would apply. Okay, even though the pasuk the pasuk doesn't say chamishi sav over here, but it says v'yosaf, and we're going to dash in v'yosaf, and the extra vav somehow we're going to have different drushes there, but somehow the vav tells you multiple fifths. Okay, bil gavi meiser lo mechtav ksiv. By Meiser, it doesn't say, it just says, the pasuk by Meiser, we had the pasuk yesterday, Imgol Yigal Ishmi Masro, right? It says, Yosef Chamishus, if it says, he adds on a fifth. So by Meiser, it doesn't say multiple Chamishi Sav, and it doesn't say V'Yosef. You go by Meiser, it doesn't say anything about it. And we didn't learn it in the Mishnah either, and the Brisa, it was not mentioned anything about multiple. But we had no question about it. In other words, when it comes to Meiser, if it comes to Meiser, how would you have multiple fifths by Meiser? Because you redeemed it once and you redeemed it again, right? I had money in Tel Aviv. I remember I had produce in Tel Aviv. I changed it into money. Then I have to add on 25%. I add on a fifth. Then on my way to Tel Aviv, I stopped off in Modi'in and I decided to change it into other coins, whatever. So you could say you could add on a fifth there. There you don't add on a fifth because it doesn't say anything about extra fifths by Meiser. It doesn't say it possible in this. We had no question about it. So by Meiser, there's no question at all about it. In most Chumshanat, there it simply says Yosef, one person. It doesn't say Yosef or Yosef Chamishi so. Right? It just says Yosef. You just add a simpler one. You add on one time, no more. What about Gavei Hegdish? So v'yosaf chamishis kesef erkecha. Notice here it's not chamishi sov, it's not chamishi so, it's chamishis, but it says v'yosaf. So by hegdish we have this question. It says v'yosaf chamishis kesef erkecha, but tanan. Hapotis like this. If you're poti your hegdish, meaning you're makdish something, you're makdish something. Now by hegdish, we're not talking about being makdish an animal you bring for a carbon. Because if it's an animal, it's a kesef shor or aze that's roy for bring a carbon, you can't be potent unless it has a mum. But you give someone else, you gave wood, as we'll see, you gave a tray for animal, you gave something, a fox or something, that they could use and resell or whatever, and you're po to that. Most of Chumash, you add on a fifth, okay. And it says that Makdash Yid goes by, you add on a fifth. Chumsha Tanan, Chumsha to Chumsha Lotam. What about what about additional fifths, multiple fifths? Like a fifth of a fifth, right? You add on a fifth to that too, if you're poted again. You understand? I gave a piece of wood to the base of Mikdash. I needed the wood for my sukkah, so I poted. I gave some money and gave it back, or I gave I don't know, a hammer in place of the wood. Now I need the wood because I realize I need the wood. I need the hammer for the sukkah too. So I want to be part of that. You can have multiple things. Now at the end of the days, we'll see the final thing that stays with Hekdesh has to be either something they could use in building, construction, or if it's an animal, it's good for the mizbeach. You could use it. You could be poted and use an animal for the mizbeach. But it's something that basically she has to be able to use. Fine. But do you pay a fifth on a fifth if you're poted and poted? Is there a fifth of a fifth again? My Gabi Truma, by Truma, we just said it says B'Yosef. Gabi Kodesh Nami said B'Yosef. Since the extra vav is teaching, just like by Truma, we said it means B'Yosef means you add on extra fifths, multiple fifths. The same thing over here by Hekdesh. Oh, Dilma Gabi Truma said B'Yosef. There it says B'Yosef. So how do you get multiple there? Is it because the extra vav just saying is mashma? Okay, the extra vav teaches me that, or it's because of a different way. Since it says V'Yosef by Truma instead of Yosef that it says by Meiser, you take that vav, add it on to the end of chamishi so, and it becomes chamishi so because it's two vavs at the end, and that Michael is plural. Chamishi so is 1/5, your fifth, his fifth, its fifth, and chamishi so is multiple ones. So maybe by Truma, the reason it's there, it says B'Yosef, Ishakslei Levav the Yosef V'Shadas. If you take away the vav from there, V'Shadas Le'al Chamishi So, how about the Chamishi So? It's Chamishi So. If you look in Rashi, in the wide lines of Rashi in the second line tells them Mishum the Kaimlon Goran Masif and Darshan. That's the way to darshan, that you could take a letter off the beginning or end of a word and add it on to another word. So if you take the vav from V'yosef and put it onto the end of Chamishi Saf, it only works at the end or the beginning. It doesn't work in the middle. So then it becomes Chamishi Saf. So that's why by Truma you have multiple fifths. Gabe Hegdish V'yosef Chamishis. It only says Chamishis. Doesn't say Chamishi so. Even if you take the vav from V'yosef, the V'yosef V'shadas Chamishis, and you put in Chamishis, so Chamishi so, you still only got 1/5. Right, so maybe it doesn't work. So by Hegdish, which is it? Is it multiple fifths or only single fifths? Only 1/5. The tape clay. So the Gemara says the Hegdish. We have a klal, Rabbi Shimon Levi. It's the Hegdish, meaning it's a second Hegdish. You were poted a second time. As I said before, I gave some wood to the base of Mikdash, and I was poted for a hammer, and then I was poted a hammer for some nails, etc. And it could go on and on and on. Only on the first one do you add on a fifth, not on the second one, says Rabbi Shimon Levi, a Hekdesh Rishon Mosif Chomesh. Only in the first one do you add 25% of the Chomesh. I like the Sheni a Mosif Chomesh. So why don't you say you're not Mosif because there? Why are you asking by Hekdesh, how do we darshan the pasuk? Do we learn V'yosef like mashmos of the pasuk? And just like by Yosef, by Truma, it means multiple ones. By Hegdish too, or do you say it's because of Goran or Mosif and the Darshan, and it wouldn't work by Hegdish, so you're not? Says, why don't you say because Hegdish Chomesh is an additional amount? You're only chayiv Chomesh on the first Hegdish, not on the second one, and the Chomesh is effectively on the second one. Chomesh is not taking the place. You see, if I makdish number one and I put number two in place of number one, so number two takes place of number one. But when I add on the chomesh of number two, when I poted number one, I redeem number one with number two, and I add on a fifth. That fifth is a new thing. It's not redeeming number one, and therefore he says the chomesh is like a new hegdish, it's like an original hegdish. It's not a replacement. So therefore, it's not a. Rav Shimon Levi is correct that if I give wood to the base of Mikdash, that's number one, and I redeem it with a hammer, that's number two. And if I redeem it with a hammer, I have to add on 25%, right? And now if I redeem the hammer with nails, let's say I'm just at the top of my head with a box of nails, I don't add on the 25% there because it's the second. I'm not replacing number one, I'm replacing number two. You don't add on the chomesh, but the chomesh itself is like a new thing. Every time I add, it's like a new thing. So maybe there could be multiple chomeshes there too. My happy. So what's the halacha by hektish? The pasuk says v'yosef chamishis kesef erkecha. That's really what the pasuk says. It says v'yosef chamishis kesef erkecha. Our whole problem was because it says chamishis, not chamishiso. It says v'yosef chamishis kesef erkecha. Makish chomshel, and then it says you add on a fifth of the money. So there's a hekesh between the chomesh and the kesef and the money. Makish chomshel lekesef erko. Makesef erko, just like the money of its value, you add on 25%. Af kesef chomesh also nami mosef chomesh. So therefore, the chomesh does add on. But the basic halacha that if you place number one with number two, then you add on 25%. Base number two with number three, you don't add on 20%, right? But on the fifth itself, if you're replacing the fifth itself, that's a new thing each time. So therefore, maybe you would add multiple ones. But Lamaisa, so that's what he says. The 25% you added on, that's like a new thing. So there could be a multiple one there too. Gufa, I'm Rabbi Shubin Levi. I like the Shrishan Mosef Chomesh, I like the Shane and Mosef Chomesh. Only on the first one, when you replace number one with number two, you add on the Chomesh. When you replace number two with number three, or number three with number four, or down the line, you don't add on. Of my time, what's his reasoning? My time, Shubin says, Ima Makdish Yigalas Beso. If the one who originally sanctified, consecrated this item, he gave his house, whatever, to the base of Mikdash, he's the one, he's Hamakdish below Makdish, only the original one, not the Makdish, not the one who attached it on. Tofis is like to attach it or to transfer the Kedusha from number one to number two, he doesn't add on to 25. The original, the Makdish, if he's goel, if you are poda, if you redeem or consecrate number two with number one, you add on 25%. But the one that you added on, the number two, which took the place of number one, on that one you don't add on 25%. Tani Tanaka made Rav Lezer, a Tana learned in front of Lezer like this. Another pasuk says, it says, Im babehema tmeya upada erkacha. Pasuk says at the end of Vayikra, it's Perak Chav Zayin, pasuk Chav Zayin. If you look, it says, Im babehema tmeya upada erkacha yosef ishislov. Let's say you gave an animal a non-kosher animal, a donkey, to the base of Mikdash, right? Give it to the base of Mikdash, and you're poted. You add on 25 b'yosaf chamishi so love, right? Okay, that's what in Babema Tmeya Upodaber Klub Yosaf chamishi so love. You add on 25%. Rashi over here says what? Let's see. In Babema Tmeya. Ella. Ella Kosev Masvala Hegdish. Because we're talking about Hegdish. Okay, we're going on Hegdish. It says, now, why does it say in Ba Behema Tmeya? Just say in Behema Tmeya. Behema Tmeya is a pig, a donkey, a horse, right? Why does it say Ba Behema? So Rashi tells us, right? Click on Rashi. In Ba Behema Tmeya, Rashi about 6 lines from the bottom of the page. Any hektish which is like a behemoth tmeya. In what sense? A behemoth tmeya is one of the few things that cannot wind up as the final item in the base of Mikdash. Why? Because what are you going to do with it? What can you do with the behemoth tmeya except sell it? Right? Yeah. What are you going to do with it? You can't use it for Bedekabah. You can't use it for construction in the base of Mikdash. You can't be makriv on the mizbeach. So if you gave a dog or a donkey or a pig or a horse or anything to the base of Mikdash, eventually you have to redeem it for something else. So change it for wood and use the wood for construction. For what?
Your guard dog.
A guard dog. I don't know. Maybe they didn't have guard dogs. The Kohanim Levim were the guards. They didn't use dogs. Okay. So maybe there's a lesson there. Anyway, so eventually we're going to have to, eventually you're going to turn it into something else. So the idea is when it says ba behemoth tmeya, we're not only talking about a behemoth tmeya, we're talking about anything like a behemoth tmeya. In the sense that it eventually will have another. It'll be redeemed for something else. It's an original thing, but eventually it was original kedusha, but eventually it'll turn to something else, as we'll see. Upodaber, you put it. Mabe mitzmeya. It says like Mabe mitzmeya yucheres is singular. Shetchilas hegdish. It's the original hegdish. It can't be the end of hegdish. It can't be the last item. In other words, that it can't be number 2 or number 3 or number 4, because eventually you have to turn it into something that you could use in the base of Mikdash, either a carbon or use it in Bedekabayas. V'kulo l'shamayim. It all belongs to heaven. The owner doesn't get anything out of it. Umowelin ba, and there's me'ilah there, meaning you commit sacrilege. That's what we're assuming now, that me'ilah here means regular sacrilege. We're going to change that, but that's what we assume now. Afkosha cholas hegdish, anything which is an original hegdish, but kula shemayim, and it's all hegdish. What does it mean all just all shemayim? Meaning the owner has no share in it all. Mo'alim ba, you have me'ilah there too, as opposed to, let's say, kashim kalam. So we're going to analyze this now. Amalei Rabbi Elazar. So this Tana, it said a Tana learned this in front of Rabbi Elazar. Amalei Rabbi Elazar said to him, Tana, Bishlam Kula Shemayim. I understand that makes sense. Lamute Kachim Kalam, right? Kachim Kalam, the owner has a share in it too. He gets to eat the meat. Kiva the Islu Labalam Megabai. Since the owner has a share in it, there's no me'ilah there. You're saying something which is original hegdish, and the owner has no share in it. There's me'ilah. The owner has a share in it. There's no me'ilah. What do you mean? Only original hegdish? There's sacrilege. There's sacrilege on everything. My tchilas hegdish, who did my tchilas hegdish, who this me'milah, self hegdish, less me'milah. If I makdish wood and I used it, it's belongs to the base of Mikdash, and I used it myself sacrilegiously, I'm chayiv, right? Chayiv. And so if I change the wood into a hammer, I'm also chayiv. What's the difference? Either way, it's sacrilege. What's the difference? Only the original. I understand that that's not going to be a final thing, right? If a behemoth tmeya, it's not going to be the final, like she'll be transferred to something else. But whatever I make into hegdish, whether it's the wood or the hammer or the nails or whatever, if I commit sacrilege on all of them. So he said, what does that mean? Chilas hegdish, who this me'milah, just like chilas hegdish and has me'ilah, what it has me'ilah, self hegdish, less me'ilah. Dilma linyan chomish kamer. Maybe when it says over here, mo'elin, when you use the lashon, you said be'emet me'ah par berka, you said ma be'emet me'ah b'cheresh chilas hegdish because you didn't mean me'ilah sacrilege in the literal sense. This isn't the parsha of me'ilah at all. And you moil on everything, whether it's the first hegdish or the second hegdish or the one you transferred it to. Maybe you talk about maybe me'ilah here means the 5th. Why use a lashon of me'ilah? Because by me'ilah there's also a 5th. If you moil hegdish, there's also a 5th. So maybe you just meant that there's a 5th there. Okay, B'Shum Levi. B'Shum Levi says only the original thing that you're makdish. Remember, you're makdish. You gave something basically that's number 1, and you replace number 1 with number 2. Then you add on a 5th. Not when you replace number 2 with number 3. So that's what means. That's what I meant. Okay, that's what you meant. But now let's underline it. You meant the 5th. Fine. Okay, the original adds on a 5th. Anything. Amalei Rav Lavina. Like, what do you mean by that though? That the first heg, the behemoth tmeya, is only possible. You said ma behemoth tmeya, just like behemoth tmeya is singular. In what? In what sense? It's unique because it's only its original one is hegdish, and it's all a shemayim. And you add on a fifth, everything was the original. What do you mean? A behemoth tmeya is only the first thing. Let's say I gave wood to the base of mikdash, and I exchanged that for a horse. Base Mikdash said they need a horse for schlepping stuff or whatever, a donkey. So that's not hegdish. What do you mean over here? Just like a behemoth is only hegdish in the first sense, and that's when you chayav 25% on the first one, the extra 50 you owe to that one, like a Bishum and Levi. But what do you mean? Behemoth tmei is only b'chilas hegdish isa. Behemoth hegdish leisa. If it's in the middle, not. If number 2 or number 3 or number 4 or number 5, I kept exchanging it. That can't be a behemoth tmei. I'll tell you what it is. You're right. You could have an animal in the middle there, but it can't be the last item, right? Because the last item has to be either a carbon or something you use for construction. So therefore, even if it's in the middle one, it's not since it can't be at the end, the middle one also you don't add on the 25%. Right? Like he's not asking about the basic halacha is like you don't add on the 25%. But he's asking on the basic idea that what do you mean here? Behemoth tmeya, just like behemoth tmeya is it could only be at the beginning of the hekdesh, not at the end of the hekdesh. What do you mean? It could be in the middle also, right? It can't be at the end, but it could be in the middle. You could let's say you had 5 items. You were first makdish number 1. You exchange number 1 for number 2, and then number 3, number 4. So the 5th one can't be a behemoth tmeya, but 2, 3, 4. But 2, 3, and 4 could be. It could be in the middle. So add on a 5th there too. Why do you say, just like you're saying, Ba behemoth tmeya, teach me not just behemoth tmeya, but anything like behemoth tmeya, that it only at the beginning of hegdish works, not at the end, like Rabbi Shua and Levi. But what do you mean? A behemoth tmeya, it doesn't have to just be at the middle. So if in the middle, maybe you should add a 5th there too. The last one you can't add on a 5th anyway because you can't be poda. Once, in other words, if the last item that it becomes, you can't, if it's the last item, you can't be poda that. If it's it's the last item. The last item right now, the 5th one is an animal, right? So as the last item, you can't be poda. Rashi says, if it's the last item, and let's say you took it for a guard dog and you were never poda. So what are you going to do? You can't be poda. You can't be poda for if it's the last thing, you can't be poted. So what are you're going to leave it as a guard dog, right? So as a guard dog, so that's the last item. You're not poted. So you're not poted. So there's no 5th there. But if you could be poted for something else, for let's say something you could use like wood or like a carbon, so why shouldn't you add 25% there in the middle too? Just like if it's the last item. Sof hegdish literally is not because sof hegdish. Rashi says vadai below miyuta the kranami lo shayach bechomish the low parkla. You're not being poted. In other words, if it's the last item, if it's let's say you gave a dog and they're going to use it as a guard dog, they're never going to be poted. So there's nothing to talk about. There's no 25% because you're not going to be poted. So just like if it's the last item, you're not going to be poted any further. There's not going to be a number 6 or a number 7. So you're not going to be poted. You're not going to 5th. So the middle one also not going to be 5th. Afem Sagdish also ain't a most of Chomish. That's what he's learning over here. Only the first one, not the other one. Amalei Rav Zutra, Bereid, Rav Mari, Ravina. My chosin mom's like, why do you compare it with Sof Hagdish and say by Sof Hagdish, there's no choice. If it's the last item, you're not being poted. Of course, no 20%. Did Malchus be poted compared to the first one, where you could add on 25%? So again, if the first item was this animal, right? This animal, and you're poted for number 2, number 3, number 4. For number 2, you add on 25%. That's the first one. But for number 3 and number 4, you should also add on 25%. We'll compare it to the Sof Hagdish where you're not being poted. There's no 25% there because you can't be poted. Oh, you know why? Because we're talking about something which is transferred, something that's transferred. In other words, number 1 is the original one. So when you're transferring number 2 for number 1, you're taking a transferable. You transfer to Hagdish or a what was the word I used before? Tofes. I forgot the good word. I had a good word for it before. Grabbed onto it, or you held onto it for something else. In other words, a middle one like number 3 is more comparable to number 5 because number 3 and number 5 were both transfers from transfers. as opposed to original. Why don't you learn from number one? Why don't you say number three should be like number one and like number two? Because you're comparing it to something which has a kedusha afterwards, from something else which has a kedusha afterwards, as opposed to the final hektish, where you're not going to transfer, where you're not going to be potent anymore, where there is no fifth there. So why don't you compare it to the first ones? The answer is, I'll tell you why. When it talks about the korbanos that you bring in the base mikdash every day, it says over there, ha'ola. And how do we know? We darshan from ha'ola that ola is the first thing brought. Rashi brings down the chsiv gabi seder maracha ubir le'akona etzim baboka be'avrcha ha'ola. The Hey Yisera teaches us that that's the first thing that's burnt in the base mikdash every day. It's not the first step. Oh, the first you have to remove the ashes and stuff like that. But the first thing that's burnt in the base mikdash is the ola, because the word ha'ola, hachanami hatmeya. The pasuk says in my, what do we say? Hatmeya. The Hey teaches me that Tmeya Rishona you compare it to the first one, and Tmeya Rishona only the first one, not the last ones. So therefore we say Tmeya Rishona. Rashi says that Hatmei is also only Tmei Rishon. In other words, only the first one, because what does the pasuk say? You add on the 25% or the fifth only on the first one, not the other ones. So you could, based on Sfara, you could say it goes either way, right? Which one do you do? So he said Rabbi Shua Levi, in other words, he's bringing this Tana, learned from Blezer, learned like Rabbi Shua Levi. So we said Rabbi Shua Levi. But Rabbi Shua Levi learned it out from what? From how did he say? We said what's his reasoning? Hektish, we said, where did it come from? Right? It said from where Mishum Levi, I like Mishum Moshe, I like Shein Moshe. I'm Ramaita Mishum Levi. It says in Mamakdish you go as based on Mamakdish, only the original one and not the one who transferred kedusha onto something else. Right? What word did I use before for matfis? I had a better word. Transfer or attach. You attached it. You attached it to something else, right? They're not in other words, only the original thing gets added 25% when you replace that. And when you replace that replacement, when you replace number two with number three, you know. And that's the same thing over here. But over here, he bases it on from Hatmeya, only the first one gets the 50, that gets added on the fifth, not the other ones. Hachanami Hatmeya, Tmeya Rishona. Tani Kavas Rabbi Shuma Levi. A raya from the Bryce, like Rabbi Shuma Levi, was only the first one. Parazu, Tachas Parashal Hegdish. I give this para for another one. I gave a para of Hegdish. Let's say it had a mum or something like that, so it wasn't, you couldn't bring it as a carbon. And I'm replacing it. Or talazu tachas tal shel hegdish apadi is paradoi the yadiga shal yoni. Even though technically you can be poda, even an expensive item that you get to the basement, which was $1,000 worth something worth $1. Technically it's padui, but still hegdish can come and demand make up the difference. You can't cheat hegdish that way, even though technically it is redeemed. Let's say he says parazu b'chamesh shlam. He says this para for 5 sell. He said specific 5 sell tachas para shel hegdish, or talazu b'chamesh shlam. It's worth 5 sell tachas hegdish. Even though it's not worth 5. I said it's worth 5, even though it's not worth 5, it's still published. Right? So and of course they'll get you for it, right? Even if it's not worth that, and don't say, well, since you've added value to it and the item's not worth 5. It says this par or this house is worth 5, I'm replacing the basement. I said specifically, I'm giving a $5 par or $5 talis in place of that one, even though it's not worth $5. I might say my words are nothing because I didn't get $5. It's still padui, and hegdish will get you for it. And then he adds on al hegdish rishon most chomish on the first hegdish that you transfer, you add on the fifth 25%. Al hegdish sheni ain't most chomish. So here's a Bryce that says specifically of B'Shuma Levi. So B'Shuma Levi learns it off in Amakdish below Amatvis, and the Tana who learned it from Belezer also basically is saying that because he's saying it based on the idea of im ba behema tmeya. Why it says ba behema tmeya? Anything like that. In other words, just like behema tmeya, which is its original one is kodesh and not the later ones. Only the original one you had on 25%, not on the later ones. He's saying like Rav Shuma Levi. Rav Shuma Levi is like a stronger lashon maybe, and the Brisa says like that. This is a little bit more difficult. Why? Because here we're saying, how do you know the behema tmeya? You only add on 25% to the original one. It says ha tmeya. So it's just like behema tmeya. Just like over there. There's a reason for it because it says atmeya, fine, but anything like that, only the original one we add on 25%, not on the later ones. So that's also a proof to Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Tomorrow's daf is daf nun hey. It'll be on the podcast, and on tomorrow's is Yontif, of course, Tuesday, Yontif, the first day of Pesach, and on the first day Chalamoid, Wednesday, we will start on the 10th line, the end of the 10th line on Daf Nun Vav. The podcast will take you till there, the end of the 10th line on Daf Nun Vav. And for the people in Chutz La'aretz, I'll put up the podcast for Nun Vav also now. But of course, if you look at it after your 2-day Yom Tov is over, Mirz Hashem, there'll be a newer version of Daf Nun.
Right, thank you,
Daf
thank
Nun
you.
Vav. So
Appreciate
you'll have
it.
Daf, put up Nun Hey and Nun Vav. Chag
Thank
Kosher
you.
v'Sameach. Kol
Chag
Tov.
Kosher v'Sameach. Regards to everybody.
Kol Tov.